All right. We are back for another episode of the Natural Health 365 Podcast. Thank you very much for joining us. And today I am with Dr. Lucas. We're going to be talking about cancer and mistletoe in particular. You're going to learn more about that in a very interesting way in just a moment. Dr. Lucas, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Jonathan. Excited to join you on your podcast here and to talk about what we're doing here at the Reardon Clinic, sort of my journey as an integrative cancer physician. And like you said, touch on mistletoe as a really powerful adjunctive therapy that I use a lot in my practice.
Yeah, no doubt. Let's do that. I mean, it's very easy, I think, for the new person, Dr. Lucas, I know you understand this, for people to sort of like react and say, oh, mistletoe is going to be this magic bullet, and I know that's not where you come from. Why don't we start off first talking about your professional background, what you're doing at the Reardon Clinic, you know, that kind of thing, and how basically in general, that helicopter view, how you're talking to people who are concerned about, you know, going through a cancer diagnosis, you know?
Sure, Jonathan. That sounds good. Yeah, I think it's always great to let people know, where I come from, what my journey's been. I see my sort of relationship with my patients as a very equal sort of relationship. You know, my experience and my journey is just as important as theirs. So I'm a naturopathic physician. I've been in practice about 11 years now. I spent the first 8 years of my career working at Cancer Treatment Centers of America, which is a pretty well-known sort of comprehensive cancer center here in the U.S. There's 5 hospitals kind of spread out amongst the different regions. So I did my residency, my training through them, spent about, like I said, 8 years in everything from patient care to research to inpatient support as well. So that's really where I got most of my clinical experience through them, which we can go into more. But in the last couple of years, I've been over here in Kansas City area, working at the world-renowned Reardon Clinic, which some of your listeners may be aware of already, but they've been around for 30, 40 years. It was first started by Dr. Hugh Reardon, who was a big pioneer in the orthomolecular medicine movement. And he also did a lot of the original research with the NIH to establish sort of the safe use of IV vitamin C for cancer support. So I had known about Reardon, and I just kind of had a good timing with sort of my time at CTCA coming to an end, and the opportunity opened up here. And so I joined the Reardon Clinic 2 years ago and have been able to learn even more here about ways to support cancer patients with integrative therapies. Of course, the vitamin C, which I already was using in my practice at CTCA, but just got my understanding just became accelerated by being in the environment that Reardon Clinic has here and all the research that we do with it, and really our global we're well known globally for IV vitamin C. We've got partners in Korea, partners in Japan, partners in South America that all are using the Reardon Clinic protocol for vitamin C support for cancer patients. So that's sort of a little bit of background for me. And as far as the different types of therapies that I use in my practice, we touched on mistletoe a little bit. We'll talk more about that specifically. But in addition to vitamin C, in addition to mistletoe, of course, we focus a lot on nutrition with our patients. I focus a lot on lifestyle factors. Things like sleep and stress reduction and exercise and all those other things that, we know that, all of those other things, even though they seem like smaller pieces of the puzzle, altogether really can make a huge difference. There were some studies that show that diet and lifestyle changes can make up to a 50% difference in your risk of recurrence with most common types of cancer. So we try to, do a very comprehensive and well-rounded integrative treatment plan for patients. I like to tell patients that I sort of like their quarterback for all things integrative or natural health support while they're going through their journey. And it's not just about while they're going through treatment either. I see my relationship with my cancer patients as more long-term. Once we have the cancer out of the body, there's still work that needs to be done. We still need to address the underlying issues. We still need to address sort of the root causes, if we can identify them, of what caused the cancer in the first place. So that's where the long-term work is done. But we're lucky that we have therapies like vitamin C and mistletoe that have been well researched, have been around long enough that we've learned how to use them alongside conventional therapies. And we know that they can only, if used the right way, can only provide enhancement and synergistic effects with those conventional treatments.
Do a lot of the patients that go to the Reardon Clinic, are they doing conventional care as well? What's the percentage of those that are doing that versus, you know what, they're either done with conventional, or perhaps a percentage that never did conventional therapies? They were just diagnosed and they just 100% go to a Reardon Clinic type place. What's that percentage of the population look like for what you're seeing?
Yeah, I was actually just a new patient I met with this morning was kind of talking about that same question. She had the same question for me, and the best guesstimation, I would say that kind of like there's three kind of categories, and they're probably equally spread, kind of a third, and a third. And each of those thirds would be, the first one would be kind of patients that are going full bore with standard of care therapies. They're doing everything that their medical oncologist is asking them to do. They're following the guidelines, but they also want to utilize us for more support, for side effect mitigation, and for that long-term healing. And then I would say there's a third that is doing some pieces of the conventional approach, whether that might just be surgery, but maybe they're deciding to forego chemotherapy or radiation. But they're doing some piece of that conventional component with maybe a little bit more aggressive integrative therapies to try to, bridge the gap a little bit better. And then we do, of course, have another third of patients that are sort of in that category of, they're not doing any conventional therapies. They might be following with an oncologist for surveillance, but they're not taking any of the standard of care therapies. Or the other part of that third might be patients where there's really nothing left for them to do on the conventional side. They've kind of used up all of the so-called approved therapies or approved lines of therapy, and they're really, they've kind of been let go by their oncologist.
I've interviewed for a long time, Dr. Lucas, a lot of integrative healthcare providers, and I think back to one of the first integrative healthcare providers, or not, I shouldn't say first integrative, but one of the first really well-known docs who was talking to my natural health audience, Dr. Bernie Siegel. And I would imagine you're aware of his work and love medicine and miracles. He would say that no matter what it is you choose, if you have a strong conviction that this is the way to go, that your outcomes will be really good. So I preface, I want to say that first before I ask you my next question, because I have a natural health bias. God forbid I was ever diagnosed with cancer. To be honest with you, full transparency, I don't know exactly what I would do. I would probably lean towards all natural health therapies, throw the kitchen sink at it, if you will, that kind of an attitude or an approach I would take. But I want to ask you, just generally speaking, not to suggest that this is the way to go for any person listening, but by and large, what do you see as the most successful group of people? Maybe you would just feel more comfortable answering who you see are the most successful in overcoming a cancer diagnosis, seeing it on the other end in a much better way. What does that patient look like, Well,
I think I would start with what you started, your last a minute or two there off with is the power of the mind and the conviction and being 100% aligned with what you're doing. I would say that I see success amongst all of those different kind of three categories of patients with their approaches, but the common denominator is my patients that beat the odds and really thrive through a cancer diagnosis, it's almost like they already know they're going to be healed. It's just a matter of, taking the steps that get lined out in front of them, but they already know the end result. And you can see it sometimes in their eyes or just the way they talk or their body language. And so I would say that above all, really, the power of the mind is very powerful, and it's something that you can't really necessarily always instill or teach patients to have or do, unfortunately, even though we try to cultivate that with some of our practices and referrals. But I think that, the way you said it rings home, is that whatever you feel like is your conviction and what your path and what you want to do, at the end of the day, it's your body. We shouldn't feel like because there is a so-called standard of care guidelines, a lot of patients do that and don't have a good result. So to act like that's the only option for them, I think that's not the way to go about it. And a lot of times, unfortunately, patients, when they get diagnosed, they don't really take time to think about really what they want to do. And they kind of either their family members get them into see an oncologist soon, or they just feel like that's the right thing to do, or their primary care doctor that they have a good relationship with says, you got to do this right away. And there's a pressure. And so I think, I always love to see patients. That was my new patient this morning. She came to see me before she even met with the medical oncologist. She said, I value your opinion just as much, if not more, than what they're going to tell me. And I want to get this side of the story before I hear what they're going to say. And I think that can really help to change the way that they view this whole, really view their options, because when they go to a conventional oncologist, they won't get any of this sort of education or this material or this information about natural things they can do to support their body. It's really just focused on, I tell patients, there's the cancer, but then there's also the human being that has the cancer. And conventional oncology, mainstream medicine is all about just focusing on the cancer. And they do very little, actually, they do more to hurt the human being that has the cancer. And so that's where we primarily put our focus is, what can we do to support the human, to restore the natural defense mechanisms, the immune system, help the body clear out whatever toxins it's having issues with, reprogram the epigenetics around what's going on with the cancer, block metabolic pathways. There's so much that can be done on that side of things that, unfortunately, patients that are just going with standard of care are missing out on.
You touched on so many things to unpack there. I know that half of our conversation is going to be really focused on mistletoe. That's what I'd love to do with you. But I think this part of the conversation is very important because, like you already said, and I already sort of began this kind of line of our talk here, is that it's whatever it is that you feel is best for you is very, very important. And a lot of what I hear from people, what they experience when they're diagnosed with cancer, is a lot of fear-based tactics, and like what you say, very focused on disease management and treatment, and it's so much of these other things are left out. I think a lot of people feel disempowered. A lot of people feel a very low self-esteem, right? Low confidence in what they can do, what they can accomplish when they're faced with a tremendously dangerous health crisis like cancer, heart disease, whatever it might be. And I think those things are definitely, they have to be dealt with because, again, like you also mentioned, I knew another physician, Dr. Nicholas Gonzalez, who was a dear friend of mine. He's since passed away, and his soul will be resting in peace right now. But he often would talk to me about how he could immediately, after 25 years in the cancer business, if you will, of talking to people about cancer, he would immediately sense when someone just didn't want to be there in front of him because of a family member's pressure, family dynamics in general, their own lack of confidence in what they were listening to from him. And he could really sense that, you know what? They either A, didn't want to live anymore, which God forbid anyone should feel that way, or B, really felt like conventional was the way to go. And you know what? He was the first one to look at that person and say, you know what? You don't belong here. You really need to go, one way or another somewhere else, because that's what was best for that individual, you know?
Yeah. Dr. Gonzalez was certainly a pioneer himself, and contributed a lot to our understanding on other ways in which we can impact, cancer and sort of root causes of cancer. His books are amazing, and we definitely lost him way too early. But yeah, I completely agree with all those sentiments. You have to be honest, at the end of the day. If patients aren't 100% into what you're asking them to do, your chances of having a success with that patient, diminish quite a bit. And so, I always try to do what I feel is best for my patients, even if that means sending them somewhere else.
And how important, Dr. Lucas, how important is it to have, and again, it's not to put pressure on people listening, but I think it's really important to talk about, because I see it as a major deal, is how important is it to have support, at least from one other person, besides the doctor, right? You're there trying to teach and do your thing, but how important on a family or a friend level is it important for that person with cancer to have somebody else that they can lean on for emotional, mental support? What do you think?
Yeah, I would say that certainly maximizes the potential for having a good outcome when you do have, and usually, the more the better, not just one person, but the more support I see around a patient, the better overall they do. So, oftentimes we do see patients, there's schisms in the family dynamics. Possibly that's one of the root problems, and, I do believe there's an emotional toxicity quality to some people's cancers. And that oftentimes does stem from issues with families and dynamics there and relationships. So it can either help or hurt just as much one way or the other, having the right support or having people that maybe are holding you back or are themselves an actual obstacle for your healing.
Let's get into it a little bit then. It's a specialty of yours or something that you work with on a regular basis. Describe to our audience, mistletoe, what's it all about kind of thing. And, in what cases is it really something that's good to incorporate for a cancer patient?
Yeah, mistletoe is it's a therapy that's been around for a long time, actually even longer than IV vitamin C, which dates back to Linus Pauling and actually even Frederick Klenner back in the 40s and 50s. But mistletoe goes back to the early 1900s and really starts with one man, Rudolf Steiner, who is largely considered sort of the father of German naturopathic and anthroposophic type medicine. And he discovered that European mistletoe, which is actually much different than the mistletoe we find in North America, which we typically just know of as sort of that ceremonial plant we use around the holidays. European mistletoe species have been used medicinally for many years, probably close to 100 years now. And what we find that's unique about this plant, probably what tipped Dr. Steiner off to why this might be a powerful medicinal plant, is that it doesn't obey a lot of the natural laws of the plant kingdom. It blooms in winter. It's a semi-parasitic plant. Even the American version is, you see it in winter, it's kind of those orb-looking plants that grow on other trees. So it's actually acting like a parasite off those other trees and getting its nutrients from the other trees. And the root structure is very interesting as well. It actually has a centered root structure, and it grows in a spherical nature as opposed to most plants that grow towards the sun or orient themselves at least towards the sun. Mistletoe does not. And it produces its fruit, its berries in the winter, which is, again, opposite to most plants. So very interesting and unique plant. But as far as the medicine that they get from it, there are a couple of different compounds. One which is called lectins, which are found in other plants and foods, and can be, some people think, can be a cause of some autoimmune conditions, interestingly enough. Lectins are found in mistletoe, and there's also something called viscotoxins. The scientific name for mistletoe is Viscum album. And so viscotoxins, this is what makes mistletoe, if you were to eat it orally, it makes it toxic. It can actually make you quite sick. It's actually poisonous. But as you know, I'm sure, most of our best medicines come from toxic plants, semi-poisonous plants. So another key indicator there that of the medicinal potential of mistletoe. So anyways, Steiner, and over the years, they developed a way of administering mistletoe, particularly for cancer patients, but used in some other conditions as well. It's typically given by subcutaneous injection, kind of like a diabetic gives themselves insulin. It's typically given several days throughout the week, 2 or 3 times. And at its real core of what it does in the body, it causes an immune modulation, or actually even really an immune stimulation. And why is that important? Well, cancer only grows because the immune system lets it, okay? We all have cancer cells floating around our body. It's a matter of, at the end of the day, does our immune system get rid of those cells, or do they detect those cells and then get rid of them, or trigger them to commit cell suicide? So this is an ongoing thing. It's in everybody's body, but when someone actually gets to the point where they have a full-blown tumor, that scale has been tipped where either they're making too many cancer cells for the immune system to keep up with, or the immune system was suppressed long enough to allow that to happen, or a combination of the two. And so the idea with the mistletoe injections is to rebalance that scale in the favor of the immune system, so that we re-engage the body's ability to get rid of cancer cells on its own. So there's no real direct cytotoxic effects produced by the mistletoe, which is another reason why it's so safe to combine with chemo or other conventional treatments. But it essentially is repairing the underlying problem, which is the immune suppression and the immune system's inability to get rid of enough cancer cells where that scale is not tipped in favor of a new tumor forming.
Do we understand what actually activates the immune system? Is it just the lectins, just what you mentioned, or is there something else?
So
does that work?
the actual medicine that is injected is a diluted extract, which contains the lectins, the viscotoxins, and there are some other compounds that are in there. It's not one isolated compound, but when that is injected into the body, it stirs things up. It stirs up a macrophage, an induction of macrophages, an induction of natural killer cells, an induction of T cells. And by way of it reacting to the mistletoe, it also creates this parallel reaction towards certain cancer types.
Do you give it to all cancer patients, or is it somehow, in a way, contraindicated?
Yeah, there are a few limited contraindications. Of course, we always test patients for an allergic reaction to mistletoe. I've been doing this about 8 years. I've never seen one, but we do always do a test dose before for that. And then anything else would be, the main other contraindication would be patients that have an active flare of an autoimmune condition. And that would simply just be because you don't really want to ramp up the immune system when someone's in an active flare with something like Crohn's or colitis or MS.
So when you're using mistletoe as a therapy, and just really quick, to be clear, the North American mistletoe is never used when we talk about mistletoe
Correct.
therapy.
It's just
for cancer.
European
Is that correct?
species.
when we're using that as part of a program, how is a cancer patient supposed to think of this as something that they may incorporate? Is it once a week, twice a week? Does it depend on the severity of the cancer? Is it all the time, even past when they don't have a detectable cancer? They that kind of thing. How often and how long is something like this expected to keep up as a therapy?
Yeah, so typically with active cancer, when I'm first seeing patients, if they've newly diagnosed or they're going through treatment, we will start them on 3 times a week injections, typically Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and usually we'll keep them on that sort of protocol for 6 months at least, or until we've gotten towards the goal of either there's no evidence of disease or whatever markers we're watching for that patient are, normal. And then there are maintenance phases or maintenance protocols. And so the idea is that, you want to get this sort of robust stimulation of the immune system to help with the active cancer that's there. But then long-term, there's more of a rhythmic dosing or pulse dosing that sort of just gives it that signal on a less frequent basis to stay oriented towards going after cancer cells.
So for those people, Dr. Lucas, that are, how should I say it in a nice way, they're more left brain oriented. What about studies? You have something that you could share with us?
Yeah, of course. Mistletoe, this is again, like I said, a therapy that's been around a long time. Most European countries, it's already an approved therapy, and it's something that their insurance covers and all that. But over here, in the U.S., obviously the FDA is usually slow to adopt anything that's more on the natural side. But in the last few years, we have seen a pretty large-scale phase 1 and 2 study opened at Johns Hopkins. And actually what they're using in their study is an intravenous form, so not the typical injections, but an IV form of mistletoe. And they've enrolled, I think, 50 or 60 patients. It's underway, and we're hoping in the next few years, or hopefully less than that we'll get some of the final results, and that will kind of just speed up the awareness, the acceptance, and just add to the evidence base that's already out there to support mistletoe use. In the meantime, there's we need more doctors doing it here, but there are some that, like myself, that have experience and still offer the therapy as sort of an off-label treatment. It's not illegal or anything. It's just that it's not, technically FDA approved.
So what about telling people what they can expect? Is there a painful phase? Will people, excuse me, when you say a stimulus, right, to a perhaps sluggish immune system, if we can put it that way, I would think that for certain people, there might be more fatigue during the day as far as the physiology kicking up more and having more biochemical reactions, if you will. Is that kind of something that you see, that people might react by feeling a bit more tired? Not that that's negative, but I'm just curious, what are some of the things that people might expect,
Yeah, actually, you'd be surprised. Typically, you see the opposite with mistletoe. You can see low-grade fevers and some mild headaches, but typically in my practice, what I see is that patients very early on in the mistletoe therapy, once they've started the injections, that their energy improves, that their appetite, that their mood, that pretty much across the board, all measurements of quality of life seem to improve. And so that's another great reason why to use it as an adjunctive to conventional treatments, because those tend to be side effects of chemo and radiation and more conventional treatments. So that's another indication, not only for the immune benefits, but for offsetting a lot of the side effects and toxicities of standard therapies.
I think as we close out, Dr. Lucas, probably one of the things that you just triggered off in me that I think is just a great final point for us to make, and I certainly just want to get your comments on it, is the idea that no matter what a cancer patient finds, right, you don't have to have a medical degree, You don't have to have a PhD. You don't have to have this huge experience or be this super bright person or some unique individual to realize that anything that you're doing to help yourself with a health crisis, if you're feeling better in energy, your mental, emotional state is more upbeat, how important is that for the real practical sense that someone's going to continue to do not only what feels good, but perhaps even be able to add on, because they're mentally, emotionally, and physically doing so well, hey, maybe I can walk now. Hey, maybe I can now make that soup for myself at home that I've always wanted to make. You know, the list goes on and on. How important it is that compared to perhaps what so many people lose sight of if they just do conventional therapies or anything for that matter that's dragging them down physically, which will then automatically really crush them mentally and emotionally as well. And then that sets the stage that they perhaps do more destructive things as they go along. So it's a real delicate balance, right? A dance that you have to be mindful of, I'm sure, when you're coaching people, right?
Yeah, and this is, goes back to what I said earlier about, there's nothing being done to help support the human being that has the cancer. And that's where I think a lot of our therapies really shine. And, if we're able to do more things that create health in people, even if they have a sickness or an illness or a disease, if we create more health through therapies and through diet and lifestyle and mental, emotional work, whatever, if we create more health, there's less space for disease to grow and thrive. And so that's that constant balance where we're always trying to tip that scale in favor of creating more health, which you could say, things like mistletoe and vitamin C, while they have some effects towards fighting cancer, they also have this parallel effect where they create more health in the body and restore the natural sort of healthy mechanisms and rhythms that the body needs to sort of find its way back to health. And so to me, it makes complete sense. And I hope for your listeners that resonates as well. But it's unfortunately in conventional medicine, it's so one-sided with just focusing on the disease itself. So we really need to rebalance that, get patients and doctors thinking more about the other side of the coin, which is supporting the human being and the rest of the body that needs to create health as well.
Well, I think you just nailed it right at the end. For people to take away from here is this whole attitude needs to change. I think more and more people on a conscious and subconscious level, the reason why they're so frustrated with conventional care is something's missing, right? To the uneducated person out there who's just frustrated, I think on some sort of level, they do know that we're not trying to figure out how to make the inner terrain healthier, how to make the human body healthier. Instead, like you say, just kill the cancer cell, kill. And meanwhile, it's killing healthy cells, chemo, radiation, causing all these negative, collateral damage, massive negative effects. And people are like, what's going on here? Isn't there something else that we need to do? And everything that we're speaking about today, I think, is just about supplying the body with things that make us happier. And if we're happier and healthier and on a cellular level, we're more energetic and we've reduced our toxic burden, which we talk about all the time, Dr. Lucas, with all of my programs. I mean, why is that still such a radical concept in 2020? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I know this video will probably live on a while. Maybe we won't be talking about the pandemic anymore, but I think you can find a lot of parallels with what's going on with the viral pandemic we're dealing with right now currently, and that same mindset. My focus is cancer, but I think that this approach really, should apply, and these changes that we're talking about, you and I today, they need to be applied broadly and across the board with our whole healthcare system. And, we're due for a paradigm shift. And I don't know why these things seem so radical, like you said, but to me, it makes complete sense. And I think for most patients inherently, I kind of interview my patients a little bit to get a feel for kind of where they're coming from, their values, their mindset. And I think through that, overwhelming majority of my patients deep down know that all of this stuff makes sense, and that we're missing, at least half of the battle by not doing more of this natural support to try to get the best of both worlds. I mean, I'm not completely against conventional medicine, and I hope it's not coming off that way. I just feel like there's so much more we can do to set ourselves up for success, and to decrease the amount of toxicity that the conventional treatments bring along with them. But yeah, I mean, I hope that, like I said, with this whole pandemic, that might be one of the silver linings that comes out of that.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think this pandemic is clearly putting a bright light on the idea that your immune system has really got to get better. And I think that legitimately, I say it that way, a lot of people are running around so scared about a virus because, again, on a conscious and subconscious level, a lot of people, I think, feel like they are dancing on thin ice, meaning on a health level. And so this virus is like, oh my God, one more thing. If I get this, it's going to really throw me over the edge. And people who are overweight and they're on medications and they're diabetic, they've got blood sugar problems, they have hypertension, they're taking drugs already for all kinds of problems. They feel like they're living on the edge. And now this virus comes, they really feel like it's going to kill them. And so I think that this is a really necessary part of, hopefully, like you say, I agree with you, hopefully people are waking up more and more that we've just got to get involved in improving our own personal health, which is the ultimate defense against all of these, major chronic illnesses that we experience today.
Yeah, well said. It's, I'm sure most people have seen the statistic about, 85% of chronic illness is related to diet and lifestyle. And so, all those things you rattled off there, hypertension, diabetes, metabolic syndrome, obesity, it's all about taking accountability for your habits and what you're doing to either promote health or disease in your body. And, doctors don't heal people. People heal themselves. I truly believe that. And so this ultra reliance on doctors and the government and hospital systems to take care of us, we got to get rid of that mindset and learn how to take care of ourselves.
Without a doubt, it's not sustainable. Dr. Lucas, for those who want more information about you, the Reardon Clinic,
yeah, our website's a real just wealth of lots of information, www.reardonclinic.org. We also have a YouTube channel. Just search Reardon Clinic on YouTube. Tons of past presentations, podcasts, stuff like that on there. We're on social media, both under Reardon Clinic, on Facebook, all the normal social media sites. And then I post a lot on Instagram under the handle at Dr. Lucas, doctor spelled out. And so, yeah, we're out there if you want to look for us. And we've got 3 clinics across the state of Kansas, our flagship clinic in Wichita. I'm here at the Overland Park or Kansas City office. And then we have another clinic out in Hayes, Kansas, which is out in the western part of the state. But yeah, we're here to help. We pretty much are willing to take on any sort of complex chronic disease cases. I see mostly cancer, but we have providers that specialize in other illnesses as well. And we're here to try to help people create that real health for themselves.
Well done today, Dr. Lucas. I really appreciate your time. Thank you very much for being with us.